Okay, it is 4:30. Welcome everyone to our Better Together event, all about student engagement. My name is Dawn McHatter, and I'm the Curriculum and Instruction Senior Manager here at Van Andel Institute for Education. I'm so glad to have you all join us today on this very important topic. And just to give you a little idea of who we are, Van Andel Institute for Education, we are part of the Van Andel Institute. And within the Institute, we also have a research facility where we have researchers that are studying diseases such as cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and also looking at nutrition, metabolics, and how those play a role in human health. What's great about the research facility is it's so close to where we are that we're able to work alongside those researchers and really find out what makes what skills do we need to bring to our students to make excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm letting some people in here. What skills that we can bring to our classrooms and share with our students and share with the teachers that we serve as well to be not only successful scientists, but successful thinkers, problem solvers, critical thinkers, analyzers. And so with that, we have K-12 programs for both students and teachers. We have students here every day with field trips. We have students in after school programs. We do teacher PD, we have summer conferences and instructional resources. So we really practice what we preach. We make sure whatever we're sharing with our teachers, with our administrators, we have shared with our students, we have done ourselves, and we bring that to you. So we very appreciate your time today. I also want to give a great big shout out and thank you to our admin panel. We have Stephen Best. He's the president and of the Systems for Innovative Schools, and Brent Raby. He's the Associate Superintendent for the West Aurora School District. So thank you both for being there. If you want to go ahead and give a shout out to everyone, Stephen and Brent.
Glad to see everyone here.
Great. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for having me today. Excited for the conversation.
Great, thank you. And we're going to jump into that administrator panel here very shortly. I want to take you first through a little bit of a chat exercise to get the chat warmed up, if you wouldn't mind. Just go ahead and let us know where you're from. And when you think of student engagement, looking at your classrooms, your school, what do you think of? What is the ideal student engagement? In 3 words or less. Is there one word that just comes to mind, or a couple that come to mind when you think of ideal student engagement? Go ahead and share that in the chat. I love that. Active learning, memorable experiences. Yes, making them memorable. They mean something, right? Thank you. Okay. Love it. Welcome from Texas. Yes, interactive learning, hands-on. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, thanks, Gina. As well. Fun. Yes, it should be fun, right? We want it to be fun. We can't forget the fun. Absolutely. Very important. Do that. Well, I'm going to leave this going. You go ahead and introduce yourselves and put your ideas in there for what student engagement means to you there. So our time today, so we're going to first set the stage for student engagement. Then we're going to jump into our administrator panel with both Brent and Stephen, and then we're going to end with some top tips and takeaways for you to bring back to your school. And please be sure to stick around to the end because we do have an opportunity enter to win. So hang on to that as well. All right, so let's set the stage for student engagement. And feel free to engage in the chat throughout the whole thing as we network and maybe ask questions or give some ideas as well. But maybe this is you. As a student, can you commiserate with that? Or maybe as a teacher, this is something you've experienced. Or as an administrator, dealing with engagement issues, whether they're just not engaged and just not doing anything or bored, or they are doing something, but it's not what they should be doing, right? Those are the students we see. But we know engagement is so critical, so crucial to student success. And one of the definitions that really resonated with me and with the work that we do here and the work we share with our teachers is really thinking about engagement in three parts: the head, heart, and hands. So this definition here, essentially, authentic student engagement involves cognitive focus, attention, emotional fuel, motivation, interest, and curiosity, which sets the groundwork for constructive learning behavior that leads to deep and long-lasting learning. Engaging the student, their head, their heart, and their hands. One of the leading experts was Philip Schlechte on engagement, and he wrote a lot of books. He went around country sharing his ideas, transforming schools, and the idea of student engagement and how to transform teaching and learning by focusing on engagement. And he came up with these different levels of engagement, and I bet you can pinpoint a particular student, even students you've dealt with in this past week already, that would fall into these categories. So we're going to start here at this diverted attention or no commitment. And so looking at attention and commitment levels, the students. And so we're looking at that rebellious student that refuses to do work. And so their attention is on negative things and they're actively disrupting, they're off task. These are the ones that you see, right? This next level engagement is the student that doesn't disrupt, doesn't disturb. They're very quiet. They're maybe in the back. They have their head down. They might be doing something else, but not disturbing anyone else, but has no attention and really low commitment to their learning. Then we have I'm going to do whatever it takes just to not have a consequence. Basically, this is the bare minimum student, the student that's just skating by, the ritual compliant student, the student that I need to have a C average to play football, so I'm going to get a C average. That's what I'm going to go for and nothing more. Okay? To avoid those consequences, but really sees little value in the work and the learning. And then the next student is that student that knows how to play the game of school, the strategic compliance student. Give me what I need to know so I can get my A and move on, forget it. I'm just going through this hoop, right, to get my A and move on. And then if we look at this top level of engagement, the pinnacle of engagement, the ideal engaged student, this is a student that has high attention and high commitment, that they value learning. They realize it's important. It has purpose for them. And they work despite obstacles. They persevere, right, in that. And that's really where we want all of our students to be. But if we can just take a little steps and put in new strategies and ideas to move those students along in this level of engagement to eventually get to that higher commitment level. So I'm just going to share with you just a couple of recent findings that I found interesting in some surveys. This past fall, this is from the Harris Poll, partnered with Discovery Education, and they found that 46% of teachers indicated student engagement has decreased compared to 2019. 68% of teachers report that getting students engaged is a top challenge for them. Okay, so majority of teachers realize that this is not easy, right? This is a challenge. And so how can we engage our students more? Deeper into the report, we found about the importance of curiosity when it comes to student engagement and student learning. So 90% of the stakeholders surveyed recognize that curiosity is really important to student learning, student engagement. But 82% of students believe there just wasn't enough opportunities to be curious in school. And less than half of the high school students that were surveyed say they're curious at school. Now, as a teacher myself, I know that I've seen this, teaching high school, that the curiosity level seems to kind of dwindle as students move through school. And that's what you're seeing in this chart here. This perceived level of curiosity, both indicated by teachers, parents, and students. And you can see that as the students matriculate throughout their K-12 education, their perceived curiosity of students goes down. And it's interesting to note that teachers perceive a significant decline in student curiosity as students age, rating it 20% lower than students and parents do, for various reasons as well. But curiosity is important. It's critical, it's crucial, and it's something that we can focus on bringing more into our schools, into our classrooms. Another study, this was out of Gallup. This was this past last spring, and we're looking at middle school, high schoolers, and you can see this chart here. One of the questions they asked is, basically, do you feel engaged in school? Check all that imply, and they give different scenarios. And so what they found based on that result, 25 to 54% lack engaging experiences. Students that were non-college bound, maybe non-traditional students, um, engagement was particularly low. And 59% feel optimistic about the future, but only 51% feel prepared or feel not prepared for it. So there's a discrepancy there as well, engagement. So how can we engage them more? So they asked the students that. They put it to the students. And 60%, now I don't think this is shocking news, this is not novel, said that when the teacher made the material interesting and exciting, right? 60% also indicated when was a subject they wanted to learn more about, something they're interested in, but almost half indicated hands-on learning, and then 35% when you connect it to the real world. So those are some areas we can take a look at and find out, okay, how can we bring more engagement into our classrooms, into our school? So let's take all that information that we just learned from these different surveys and what engagement is, and let's talk solutions with our administrator panel. So I'm going to bring back Stephen and Brent. Stephen Best has worked for over 30 years in every level of the education system, from being a classroom teacher to being a teacher educator and researcher at the University of Michigan. He now leads Systems for Innovative Schools, coaching district leaders on transformative innovation. Brent Raby is the Associate Superintendent for Teaching and Learning in the West Aurora School District in Illinois. Prior to his current position, he served as the Director of Curriculum and Instruction and the Director of Learning and Technology in McHenry School District 15. Welcome, you both again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. And Stephen, is it okay if we start with you?
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Well, Stephen, we're going to talk about relevance first. And in your work and working in schools, how do you make curriculum relevant to students' lives while balancing that foundational content knowledge that they need to know?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So, I think one of the things that we often think of for engagement is I've run across a lot of administrators who think, well, that's the teacher's job to make that happen. And it's to basically adapt to whatever is in the curriculum to the needs of the learners, which is true in part. But one of the things I think that does, unfortunately, is it sidesteps administration from the the notion that they've got to be a big part of making this happen too. And so often what we've ended up with in our curricula has largely strayed from that. We've often kind of stuck with more traditional content focused approaches. So when you asked about how do we balance that, we still obviously need to have some level of content that we're bringing in, but I think a key element of this is that we've got to start introducing this in terms of real world relevance, and generally where I've seen that happen, and a lot of the schools that I've worked with have done this through variations of project-based learning. There are a lot of different approaches where it could be problem-based learning, it can be inquiry learning where you're posing questions, but the key element of this, I think, is doing something that kids feel is authentic, that it doesn't feel like a contrived kind of activity where, like, I used to be a math and science teacher, and I think of the old example word problems of there's a train going from Detroit to Chicago, and
Mhm.
those truly the most contrived kinds of things that all kids tend to roll their eyes or worse when they see them, and they should, because there
Mhm.
really isn't a great deal of relevance to it. So, I think a big part of this is introducing opportunities to bring project-based learning into the schools. These are not things that you can do just kind of have a giant rollout and do K-12 project-based learning on the fly, but rather these are things where if you've got some innovative teachers who are willing to kind of try ideas around this and generate some projects that are ideally real world in that they're connected in some way to their community. So a
Mhm.
lot of projects, for instance, in past work that I had worked with districts on was tied to like investigating scientific phenomena within their community or looking at local history kinds of issues. And these are things that you wouldn't find in a textbook. They're things where in order to engage with this, kids first of all had to ask questions, but they
Mhm.
had to ask questions not just of the teacher, but really of the broader community, or ask questions and then investigate that through conducting experiments or different kinds of things where all of those other elements that you showed on some of the earlier slides about commitment and engagement and curiosity are all coming into play. And so I think a big part of what we need to do with administrators is remember that our curriculum, while we may have standards that are still tied
Mhm.
to content knowledge, we've got to be looking to the future for students because we can't rely on policymakers to do it. And in doing so, we've got to be proactive and start introducing things like project-based work, authentic work, other kinds of things that are much more engaging on the whole and not just relying on individual teachers to come up with magical ways to make the information pop to students.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that too. And, sharing that the need for the authenticity there and, connecting the standards to something that has purpose, for what the students are learning as well. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Let's see, Brent, you're up next. We're going to talk about curiosity. Stephen just mentioned the importance of that. We talked about that a little bit before the panel as well. How do you and your schools and district cultivate an environment where curiosity thrives?
Yeah, I think that um, I echo a lot of things that Stephen just said. That is one of probably the more complicated things that we try to do. Just even growing up, and I think back to my own experiences, or even when I started in a few different districts, walking classrooms. It's kind of what I would consider like the paint by numbers concept of teaching. Is that the easiest way to I remember sitting in a science classroom and everyone's doing the exact same lab and following the exact same directions and getting the exact same outcome. There's not a lot of curiosity in that. And so when we really think about that, especially working with our staff, we try to ask the question, how do we get to truly exploring ideas and concepts and not leading to one singular answer? And that is a really tough task.
Uh,
And you have to build environments in which students can't hide. And I think one of my friends who's a middle school principal the other day told me, he's like, when I observe classrooms, what my expectation is for the teacher in that classroom is that everyone answers the question. And so how do you build up an environment where I know like there's a lot of group work and I know that we like to share ideas and things like that, but those are also opportunities where kids can hide. So we try to eliminate some of those environments where we really truly show them that we value their opinion, and we try to ask questions that aren't just simply, did you get the right answer or not? Because that's a lot of reasons why kids won't answer the question, is because they're scared they're going to get it wrong. But if you build an
right.
environment around curiosity, then it's really not about getting it wrong. And I think one of the hardest things to do is to build questions, in which we in our district called stepping stone questions, that lead to more curiosity than just right answers. And I always ask our teachers, how much time are you planning for the questions that you are going to ask students. And some of those can be closed and some of those can be open and all that good stuff. There's not one right way to do it, but they have to show a progress to get kids to think. And I think a lot of people that go into the profession go more on the fly about asking those questions. And I think that's really difficult to do. And so the other thing that we've done within our classrooms is we've created exploratory talk posters and we've hung them up everywhere. And they say things like, why did you decide that? How did you reach that conclusion? Are you happy with your answer? What are the similarities and differences? So everyone in the room, the teacher, the students, et cetera, when they're working in groups or when they're examining some of the things that have happened during the lesson, everybody has a go-to question that just doesn't always end up into a yes or no or a right or a wrong. And I think that's one of the ways that we've really tried to inspire curiosity in the classroom and really get everyone engaged. So they're not just hiding and enduring the lesson, or everyone's just going to a singular correct answer at the end.
Right. I love that. I love that posters and giving them something it's almost a scaffold and to really, so they can't just say yes or no, or they're done, or you're really exploring a little bit deeper, but then also hoping to promote some additional questions that they have based on that. That's fantastic. Fantastic and very powerful to turn that into the student or the teachers asking the questions where the students are asking the questions and they keep asking them. They don't just stop because the lesson's done, right? That's really true engagement there. So thank you. Thank you for that, Brent. Just to let you know, if you have any questions or comments or you have some ideas, please, go ahead and put that in the chat as well. So we'll be taking a look at that. Okay, let's see. I think we're going to take a look at purpose. And so Brent, you're on the hot seat again. That's okay. How can schools address disengagement for students who struggle to see the purpose in traditional educational pathways?
Yeah, it was interesting. One of the things that you said early in this that I didn't really think about is the head, the heart, and the hands, right? And I probably talked about the head with the first answer, but I really want to talk about the heart and the hands in the second answer. One of the things that kind of dawned on me that we've done in the last couple of years is that we've hired restorative practice coaches for all of our buildings, and they're actually not trained typical school social workers, et cetera, that we've actually partnered with a local agency and we've brought them into our system. And really what they've been able to do is really connect kids back to the classroom that we see are starting to get disengaged. And so sometimes it's that outside perspective that where a teacher can bring up a student's name in an MTSS meeting or a tier 2 meeting and say, hey, you know what, for whatever reason, they're just completely engaged. And with a different approach of where the teacher typically attacks that disengagement through an academic lens, these restorative practice coaches are able to address it from more of a social emotional end. And they can also then do some mediation between the teacher and the student, because a lot of time these students are disengaged because they simply they feel inferior in the classroom, or they feel like the teacher doesn't like them or whatever. So that's one type of student. And then when you talked about the hands, here at West Aurora, what we've done, we've really ramped up our CTE offerings. So our career and technical education, we have very specific pathways that are earning kids dual credit to translate into our community college, but also showing them that there is a path outside of like high school for them. So we have welding, we have manufacturing, we have building trades, we have commercial. We're actually doing, pretty much monthly, where we're bringing in different organizations to actually interview those students. So they're getting mock interviews, they're getting exposure, they're actually seeing a future, and they're getting it connect back. And let's be honest, some students just thrive when you let them use their hands and build and construct and explore. And it kind of goes back to that concept of curiosity, which really, removes a lot of the passive learning that typically students who are disengaged with the traditional pathways, don't survive very well in those avenues. So I think it's a little bit of both. It's trying to use an alternative practice around restorative practices to get kids engaged, and then also giving kids just various opportunities to explore education in more of an active setting than your traditional classroom progress.
Absolutely. And I think about, you think about differentiation in classes, and think about, tier one supports, you think about academic, right there, but we also have this idea of an engagement as well. And so what engages one student doesn't engage another student. And what are those different opportunities or ways we can engage our students to make sure it's relevant to them? So I appreciate those examples. Thank you, Brent. Okay, Stephen, let's talk about some barriers to engagement that you've experienced in your work. How do you tailor engagement strategies for diverse learner needs, including students from underrepresented or disadvantaged backgrounds?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So, I think, again, kind of going back to some of what I'd mentioned earlier and a few of the things that Brent brought up. So many of the examples that Brent was bringing up are getting to the notion of really personalizing the learning and bringing it to a level where you're meeting kids with what their particular interests are, whether that's done through different instructional methods like questioning in the classroom, or whether it's through curricular and structural approaches like including a lot of CTE programming and things like that. I think when we initially think about these things again at the classroom level, there tend to be a lot of responses that people have tried implementing and are successful to varying degrees. Things like including culturally responsive curriculum and really trying to address a wide variety of different topics, backgrounds, and perspectives of students coming in, trying to differentiate instruction, so recognizing where some of those different learning challenges may be, whether they are part of system-related kinds of issues of different groups being treated in different ways, or whether they are individual kinds of things that are more around an individual student's cognitive and developmental progress in this work. We introduce a lot of these things, but I think one of the challenges, and this is honestly one of the big barriers, is when we're introducing any of those strategies or other kind of things that we have seen come up over the years, we're often layering them on a traditional curriculum.
Mm,
Doing so, what we end up doing is we try adding a lot of pieces onto a curriculum where what we don't recognize is that perhaps the root cause of disengagement is that traditional curriculum itself, that we're not providing something that kids are really seeing the level of connection with. And sadly, our curriculum, especially from a content perspective, does not really adapt a great deal. And in fact, when we look at the history of the curriculum that we've had in schools, much of the curriculum that we work with today as our core curriculum really goes back not just to the 1900s, but to the late 1800s, when
mm,
the Harvard curriculum panel really kind of established their groundwork for all of this. And much of that is still present in our current curriculum standards and the structures that we have for these courses. So I think a big part of overcoming barriers also is about changing the inherent systems that you're working with in your schools. So there's one way that you can try and change instruction on a traditional curriculum by layering on something to bring in some aspect of cultural relevance or to differentiate instruction.
mm,
But it's another thing if you're actually having kids engage in authentic projects especially of their own design, where everyone's addressing their own set of questions, and you don't really have a standard for the content, but you have standards in terms of these skills that students are developing. And so I think one of the things that has often been helpful when working with schools on trying to address these issues is also having a clear understanding of what some of those skills are. A lot of
Mhm.
times we in schools kind of make up what we think future ready skills are, but there really are a lot of organizations that have done the groundwork in all of this. And so the one that I generally point to most recently is a group called Redesign, who's come up with a kind of a framework called the Future Nine Competencies. And these are things that are really thinking about what are the kinds of skills students are going to need as learners 10, 15, 20 years out from now, and how are we building in those skills in the work that we do. So I would encourage people to look at some of those kinds of examples, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat in a little bit here as well.
Excellent. Thank you. I love you brought up, just this traditional, curriculum that we've all been a part of, for years and years and years, and thinking about how siloed our system is. This is reading, this is math, this is science, this is social studies. When it's all just knowledge, it's knowledge and understanding how to use it, when to use it, and those skills that are so important to being a problem solver, to thinking critically, to being creative, to really making a change in the world. So I appreciate you bringing that up and really thinking about our curriculum. What is it that we can do to really engage our students, especially the students that sometimes slip through the cracks? So thank you, Stephen, for that. All right, Brent, looking at the role of educators and staff here, how do you support your teachers and staff in fostering student engagement?
Yeah, I think I think I go back to clarity is key. Clearly defining how we want to engage students and and the instructional culture that we expect is really the thing that you have to build out. And I think that that's two things. Number one, with that clarity for staff, they know how to operate and navigate on a daily basis, and they know what the expectation is, right? I think
Mhm.
the other thing, it kind of goes back to the students. If students know what is expected from them, I can just talk about personally as a learner, uh, jumping from class to class to class with different rules, different expectations, different grading policies, different everything. Like it is, when I was younger, I probably struggled in that environment
Mhm.
because it's a constant state of change and, you're just not mature enough to handle some of that. So I think when we start, one of the things that you said was that kids' motivation, kind of dwindles as they progress through our system, right?
Mhm.
Like we almost
Yeah.
kind of beat curiosity out of them. And when we start, when we have a consistent expectation pre-K all the way through 12th grade about how we're just going to interact and how we expect students to interact, it's so much easier. So now that gets to the teachers, right? It's
Right.
much, that clarity is key. But then what we do is we spend a lot of time modeling. The expectation for our administrators is that every time they engage staff in professional development, it should model what our classroom should look like.
Mhm.
So we're constantly exposed to that environment and that culture, and it should be less of the administrator talking and more of the teachers talking and communicating and asking those exploratory talk questions, et cetera. And so it's a collaborative environment. So, even when teachers are saying like, oh, I didn't know what you expect me to do that, we can always go back to, hey, remember that last staff meeting? And you're always giving them strategies to pull back into their classroom. So they're not trying to invent it and they're experiencing it. The other thing that we've done is we've implemented a pretty extensive walkthrough program, and that's not necessarily just to evaluate how we're doing. That's really about exposing teachers to other teachers. And I think that's a key piece, is because, I hire so many people into instructional coaching roles or into administrative roles. And the first thing they always say to me is, I had no idea what somebody else was doing.
Mhm.
Or I had no idea that they did that in their classroom. But like we're trying to break down a lot of those walls, that this is a collaborative environment and they're not isolated in it. Like here's our expectation as a district, as a building, as a school, as a classroom, and this is how we're all in this together, and learn from your peers. And you can walk into a classroom and be like, oh, that really wasn't working. Or, hey, if you just made these subtle shifts. I think one of the things that our teachers have been most grateful for with the walkthroughs is how simple shifts in the questions they ask or the way they design a lesson can dramatically impact how students are learning. And the only way for them to see it is to experience it on their own. We can talk about it all we want on Institute days, etc. But for them to see it and catch that moment, and then when we leave a classroom, we're like, hey, what did you see? What are the subtle shifts that could have been made to make that lesson hit home even more to the culture of what we wanted? So those are the things that we've done to support teachers. I honestly, it's not about putting them in a room and showing them some magical lesson or anything like that. It's really about getting them to be curious about their own instruction and them understanding what the expectation is.
I love that because that's relevancy there. The teachers are experiencing that, they're seeing that, they're witnessing that, they're reflecting on that, they're having conversations with their peers about that. And I love what you said too about having that consistent idea of what engagement truly means, both at the staff level, but also at the student level. So we understand what it means to be an engaged student. And an engaged student is just as important as an engaged staff member. And using those same policies and processes is really, really important to do that. I love that. And those simple shifts it's a great idea and a great reminder that we don't have to necessarily change everything we're doing, but there are certain things that we can build more curiosity but by some little bit more inquiry into the classroom, making sure we're just not giving them the answer. We're scaffolding, we're showing them how to be curious, right, and modeling that for them as well. So thank you for that. Okay, we have our last question, and Stephen, this one's for you. We're talking about administrators' favorite things, right? Data, metrics, measuring, but we have to measure success, how things are going, where we're at, how things are going, where do we need to go? So what tools or metrics do you use to measure engagement effectively, and how do you act on that data?
So, I think one of the things that has been the most successful, not only in the examples that I've seen in working with schools over the years, but also really comes out in terms of looking at the research on this is exactly what Brent was saying. This is not about like a a test score or something like that. It's about what we see in classrooms through observation. And I love that example that you shared, Brent, about the walkthrough process, not only as a process for administrators to be able to see what's going on and just kind of have a strong sense of what instruction and curriculum implementation looks like, but also for teachers to be able to see each other and be able to really kind of recognize what's happening through the modeling that everyone is doing on a daily basis, and being able to have that kind of discussion and feedback. And so that comes into play in a lot of the schools that I've worked with, in that we see that there's a term called teacher collective efficacy, which has been written about by different researchers, and it's kind of fancy words for saying, do all the teachers believe that not only they, but their colleagues are going to get their kids where they need to be? And that really happens largely through engaging in observation practices and determining exactly what the kinds of metrics are that they can look at in the classroom. And these are not things where they're necessarily objective measures of engagement. It's really, really hard to do that because, as you addressed early in this presentation, engagement is not just about attention, it's about
Mhm.
commitment, and it's about curiosity, and those things are really hard to gauge, but there are a lot of opportunities in doing observation where you can see these practices play out, and you can be pretty deliberate in an observation process about trying to figure out what are the kinds of opportunities for not just the teacher to set up um, engagement, but really what are we seeing from students during this process? And having those teachers engage in discussion with each other about how they would define different approaches to engagement. And so I think that honestly becomes one of the most critical approaches that we can use from the perspective of then leading to improvement. And so that second part of the question you asked was, how do you act on that data? I always tend to think of any data that we have as kind of I think of the metaphor we often use of if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it make a sound? Well, if we brought up data and no one used it to make a decision, was it useful?
Right.
And it should be. All
Yeah.
data should be useful. And whether it is telling us to stay the course with something we're doing, or whether it's telling us like this didn't play out in the way that we want. And so I think trying to get into some approaches that let teachers define this. Um, yeah, I actually have um I have things to bring up with the group as well. So a book that I think is really useful with this is Street Data from Shane Saphir and Jamila Duggan. And the idea behind this is that there's a lot of things that we just see and know when we're in classrooms that are different kinds of data than, again, what we are typically used to of what are attendance numbers or what are test score numbers or anything like that. So I think those kind of things are critical. And then the last thing I would say is when we think of engagement, we've got to remember it's all about what the students are connecting with. And so their voice is honestly one of the biggest metrics in this. There are different ways in which schools that I've worked with or schools that I've seen have tried doing this through some more kind of objective approaches of using surveys and polls
Mhm.
and other kinds of feedback or focus groups and things like that. But I think in general, a big part of this is being able to see through individual stories that students are sharing about work. I remember one time many years ago in my practice when doing some work in Detroit public schools, and a teacher brought this student in saying, you know, we've been working on this river project, and so um, he's the student here. He's been really interested in all this. He wanted to tell you about the project that they did. And so he went on at length about this project. The interesting thing about this was not the project he was just doing now. It was a project he did literally 2 years prior. And he could tell me with the same level of detail and excitement and curiosity coming out in that story. I think those are some of the elements that we really want to think of. And no, they aren't the greatest standard, but again, if we're thinking of really trying to personalize learning to the needs of all of our learners, engagement is a personalized thing. And so being able to get some of those stories or interesting examples, I think are really critical to any of that work.
Yeah, I love that example, and it makes me think about the project is like we really want those projects that aren't trash can projects, right? Those are projects that they're going to remember, things that they had purpose and relevancy, and they connected with it in the heart, um, head, and hands as well. And I really appreciate, Stephen, what you said about, there are ways to get some quantitative data on this, like student surveys. You can look at attendance, you can look at all these different things and link it to student engagement, because student engagement is critical to success. But really understanding what are those look fors, in the classroom. Like when you walk into a classroom, or anyone walks into the classroom, how can you tell a student is engaged? And there may not be obvious. Like if everyone's paying attention, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're engaged, right? Are they asking questions? Are they collaborating? Are they, do they seem excited about what they're doing, right? So there's a lot of these different things that need to be discussed on how do we really know the students are engaged, and how can we measure that, that change as we're trying new things and trying new strategies. So appreciate that insight, Stephen. Okay, well, thank you very much, Stephen and Brent. Any other final words before we jump out of the panel that either of you have to the group?
No, I just appreciate being able to contribute. And I think one of the questions in there is like, where do you start? And in the chat, that was one of the questions. And I think the most thing is like, it takes time, and you need to find people that will champion and who will try and share their experiences. And ultimately, the best driver of making this type of change in your building are the students, because they'll come out and they'll start talking about experiences in other people's classroom. And most teachers want to be that teacher who they're talking about in that positive light about how fun that class was and what they got to do. And so that's what we've seen of buildings where it catches on like wildfire, is that the students are the ones really driving it, and the teachers want to be a part of it. So
I agree. It's like that old video, but it was that first follower type of thing. If you've ever seen that YouTube video, right? And then it just spreads like that. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Stephen,
And I would just add to what Brent said there. I think in particular, in terms of starting, it's finding the people who want to be able to start. And if you are an administrator, find a mechanism to let them run with these things. Talk through what they're wanting to do, but try and take away the barriers for them to try and make these things happen. And I think with that, as they are going through this process, do monitor what's happening, because those kind of innovators and those first followers, the kind of early adopters in the process, are generally the people who they are patient enough to work through all the weird little hiccups that you're going to have along the way, whereas not all of your staff necessarily are. There are other staff who are going to be resistant to this early on, and it's often best not to kind of involve them right at the outset, because they find ways to kind of kill some of the innovations and adhere to the status quo. So find some ways to let those groups do this. I know a lot of the schools I work with, we make this a very deliberate structure and have an innovation team that is meeting regularly. They're implementing things. They're engaging in the kind of walkthrough and observations that Brent talked about, in terms of just seeing each other and supporting each other, so that they can feed to the point where then you can get to kind of a tipping point to bring in the next level, and the next level is not all the rest of the teachers, but maybe some group who is willing to put this in, but they also need to see the outcomes before they fully jump in. You've always got kind of stages of implementation in anything, whether it's technology or a new curriculum or anything else. And so being really deliberate about the early groups in that, and letting them figure out the pathway that they need to, and work through often a lot of the problems and challenges first, so that those things are then out of the way when the next group is starting to take it on.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that advice. And thank you both, Brent and Stephen, for that as well. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat. I know that they would also be happy to respond in that as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take us through to the end here. I'm going to share with you some tips and takeaways from we're talking about engagement. And I'm going to do this fairly quickly because I value our time, your time together. So this is also going to be sent to you in a resource as well. So anything that I skip through or don't get to, you are going to have access to it in a resource that'll be coming out after this event. All right, so when we think about student engagement, these are kind of our three main areas, and maybe you have an idea of what these might represent, but I'm going to start off with our little Connect 4 game here. And so this is all about engaging students in that almost kind of the lowest hanging fruit is their attention, right? Getting their attention. And attention can be gained by remembering to have fun. And so fun supports goal setting, right? Thinking about gamification, bringing that fun into your school, into the classroom, fostering collaboration, relatedness, reducing stress, enhances that perseverance, persistence, and improves memory and cognitive processing. So if we look at having fun school-wide, you probably already do things in your school that are fun. I just wanted to add a couple more maybe to your idea list here. And if you have some ideas to bring the fun into the school, feel free to put that in the chat as well. Random Acts of Kindness Day, I just found out that the Random Acts of Kindness Day in the US is Monday, February 17th. So just an FYI on that. But thinking of ways to really engage the whole school. And here are just some examples of that. And maybe it's some sort of challenge that you want to engage your students in. Like the gentleman on the left, he challenged his students to raise $20,000. And they did, and so now he's camping out on the roof. And then the principal on the right, he challenged his students to a reading goal for a month, and they met it, and they got to wrap them up in wrapping paper. So just a way to bring in this fun, this excitement into the school. Now, if we're looking more at the classroom level, gamification wise, great way to bring games in, right? Games are something that we've all grown up with. We love them, they're fun. And so we created this apples to apples game where the students play, and it's all about forces and interaction. So we have this resource for you to share with your teachers, your science teachers. It's both K2 and 3-5 versions of this that we've added to that resource that you'll be getting. And we use artificial intelligence to help us create these too. So you can create these games very quickly and easily using those tools to help you do so. And just another example of having fun with AI. I was an earth science teacher, so I taught about, here's a rock here, one of my favorites. I taught the rock cycle and I loved it. I was super engaged, which is good because if you're engaged, hopefully the students will follow along, but I know that not everyone digs rocks, right? So how can I take my lesson plan on the rock cycle, make it more engaging, maybe connect it to Dwayne the Rock Johnson, and I can have AI help me do that. So I put this prompt into AI, asked it to take my lesson plan to make it more engaging, connecting it to the Rock Johnson, and it's gave me this. Now, I may not use all of it. I may have to tweak it still a little bit, but it's a great starting point for me, and it saved me a lot of time. And then another fun strategy, we just call this Merry Baboon. As students enter your school, is there some sort of ritual or tradition you have? For us, we like to say Merry Baboon. Instead of saying good morning, say Merry Baboon to you, my friend, because who doesn't smile when you say baboon? A really quick and easy strategy to bring the fun. The next big idea, so we talked about having fun. Now we've got this cute cat here, and we know that cats are very curious. And we talked a lot about curiosity as well, and how important that is to student engagement. One of the ways that curiosity helps student engagement is it increases intrinsic motivation, right? They want to keep asking questions. They want to find out more. You're creating a positive classroom environment when the students are curious. It's boosting that cognitive processing, and it promotes deeper learning. So one of the ways that we bring curiosity into our lessons is we have a strategy we use, and it works in any content area. It's all about messing about. So instead of diving right in to what it is that the students have to learn, right, you give them an opportunity to just play around, I put that in quotes, with the materials, or maybe you have pictures posted around your room that they're wondering, like, what are these? What's going on? They're asking questions about it. So building that curiosity. So anytime that we start an investigation, we have the students mess about with the materials. We have them at their desk. They're asking questions about it. For example, in this one, they're challenged with to build a flashlight. And before they build a flashlight, they have to learn how to build a circuit. But instead of giving them a diagram and showing them how to build a circuit, you give them the battery and the wires, and you challenge them to, okay, you've got these, figure out 3 ways it doesn't work, and try to figure out 3 ways it does work, and put it on them so that they're asking questions, they're curious, but they're also building the skills they need to then move on into that lesson. So that's a really big strategy we use here, and it's a really great way to build that curiosity. Using AI, again, as a pen pal, you can use, we use School AI. I had one of my colleagues put this prompt in, and you'll have access, to this resource as well. As a 5th grade student, I wanted to basically be a pen pal with this rustic high or rural worker. And so he put this prompt into School AI, and then I could learn more about this individual and what a day in the life of this particular individual is. And I could keep asking it questions to learn more and more about, really piquing my curiosity. And they're questions I wanted to ask, not the questions that my teacher said I have to ask, but what I wanted to ask to be able to learn more about this particular, historical figure. Mystery box is always an easy, fun way to build that curiosity, having the students ask yes or no questions. These, again, are really easy to implement. You can have these pictures and you zoom out throughout the lesson, building on that curiosity, having them guess. Also, maybe don't reveal it until the next day. That really drives them nuts, but it builds that curiosity. Same idea. You can have a picture and reveal little pieces of it at a time, and they can decide, figure out what it is, ignite that curiosity, right? With that, just easy strategies to build that curiosity in your classrooms. Finally, the last one is all about the heart, right? We're talking about purpose, finding purpose. And when you find purpose or authentic learning, relevancy, like we talked about in the panel, you're promoting that critical thinking, you're encouraging collaboration, you are making those real world connections. And I'm going to bring this up again. You're going to have projects with a purpose, no more trash can projects here. And so when we think of purpose, finding purpose, really authentic learning, or like Stephen had talked about, project-based learning, is just an incredible way to bring purpose into your lesson, still teaching the content you need to teach. And we do that with our after-school program. This example here is our Ecosystem Explorers, where the students do all these science investigations to learn about ecosystems and understand, but they do that for a purpose because they're trying to make this urban park here by our building better. And we bring in real-world experts, and they pitch their ideas to an authentic audience who chose winning group solutions to implement. And those solutions have been implemented this past fall. So it's just a really incredible way to bring that authenticity. And those students aren't going to forget that project. They are not going to forget that work. We've worked with schools. This is a local school where they did one of our projects and worked with a local nursing home to create memoirs. And so they posted this just recently on social media. So again, those students are not going to forget that work. And they connected, the content was connected. So they still were getting what it is they needed to teach, but doing that in a memorable, meaningful way. And then just a really quick strategy. It's like for a teacher to put an elephant in the room. The students always ask, why do I need to know this? Well, turn it on them. How can they find the relevancy in what they're doing? How can they make that connection? It's a great way to promote that kind of critical thinking, creative thinking as well. All right, and we had talked about supporting our staff, supporting our teachers, and making sure that we're on the same page of what student engagement is and how we do it. And we talked about having fun, being curious, and having purpose, and we do that with our work with teachers. We want to make sure that we do the same thing with teachers that we want to do with our students to engage them. So we have fun in our training. We connecting it to what they're doing, but we have fun. We are curious because we try things with students. We're curious, will this work? Will this not work? And we share that then with the teachers that we work with. And finally, we have purpose as well, because if you have a group of teachers that want to know more about how to teach in an outdoor education setting, we go outdoors, right? It's relevant, it's immersive, it's modeling, it has purpose as well. So with that, here's the enter to win. So if you have your phone handy, I can also put the link in the chat as well. We have an opportunity for you to win a free lunch and learn for your school, for your teachers, on one of those topics there. And we have introduction to PBL. So if you're interested in something that looking authentic learning, but we also have an engagement session particular as well. You fill out that quick form and you'll be entered to win a lunch and learn on a topic of your choice. And also if you're interested in any of our products or services, you can go to our website there and you can receive 20% discount on any of those products and services. And with that, I'd like to thank our panelists, Stephen and Brent. Thank you both so very much for taking the time to meet with us today and talk about this very important topic. And I also want to thank you. Thank you all for everything that you do every day to serve your students, your staff, and your school family. Have a wonderful end of your day and rest of your week. And please reach out if you need anything. Thanks so much.